what's going on, guys? Welcome to the channel. This Saturday is UFC 292, Aljamain Sterling versus Sean O'Malley for the UFC bantamweight title, and this is going to be my full breakdown and prediction. I've already done a bunch of UFC 292 content, including my full card predictions. I will link the entire playlist down in the description, as well as the end cards, if you want to go check it out after this. This main event is such an intriguing matchup for many reasons. First off, Aljamain Sterling has been open about saying this will most likely be his last fight in the bantamweight division, and he's been one of the most disrespected bantamweight champions of all time. And if he goes out there and gets a statement win against an up-and-coming talent like Sean O'Malley, a guy who the UFC is really pushing and giving him advantages going into this fight, then he really cements his legacy, regardless of what the fan base thinks. He cements his legacy as one of the best bantamweights of all time. For Sean O'Malley, he goes into this fight, the UFC is clearly pushing him. They've babied him for many of years. He finally got a step up in competition last year against Petr Yan. He got the win there via decision, and now he's challenging for a belt in the most optimal circumstances because the UFC wants to give him the best chance of beating Aljamain Sterling because they believe that Sean O'Malley can become a star. And I'm still not 100% sold that Sean O'Malley can become a star, but one thing is for certain. If he goes out there and is able to starch Aljamain Sterling and snatch the bantamweight title away from him, Sean O'Malley will become a significant pay-per-view draw. Not Conor McGregor, not John Jones, not Israel Adesanya, but he will be a little bit of a leap above just your standard everyday pay-per-view headliners, whatever that may be. He will be able to kind of stake his name and potentially propel himself into stardom, because some people kind of throw around that Sean O'Malley's already a star. I don't buy that at all. But this could be his Jose Aldo moment for Conor McGregor. If he goes out there and gets a big win against Aljamain Sterling and makes it look super impressive, then I think he can propel himself into potential stardom in the next fight or two, and he can kind of grow into becoming that star the UFC wants him to become. And also, just stylistically, this is such a compelling matchup. It's grappler versus striker. We know what Aljamain Sterling wants to do. He wants to go out there, drag Sean O'Malley to the ground, look to grapple him, look to beat him up on the ground, and look to find a submission. And for Sean O'Malley, we know what he wants to do. He wants to keep the fight standing. He wants to look for a knockout. He wants to use flashy techniques. And that makes this fight so compelling. And I'm so interested to see how this fight goes. And this is kind of a crossroads for the bantamweight division. I really wonder what the future of the division looks like after this fight, because if Aljamain Sterling wins, it appears he's going to vacate. It appears he's going to go up and attempt to become double champion against Alexander Volkanovski if the UFC allows that. And for Sean O'Malley, if he wins, all bets are off about who's the next title challenger, because I already see him kind of setting the tone. Oh, I might be fighting Chito Vera in December if I win the belt. You know, I want that rematch. And I already see him kind of starting to pick and choose his matchups for his future title defenses. So it's going to be a very interesting fight. And I think it's going to be a very influential fight to the future of the bantamweight division. And just a lot could come out of this fight in terms of even Merab Dvalishvili's career. Because if Sean O'Malley wins this fight, I don't believe he's not going to be chomping at the bit to defend against Merab Dvalishvili in his next matchup, in his first title defense. So it's going to be very interesting to see how the whole bantamweight division plays out, especially considering half the division's injured. Umar Nurmagomedov, Corey Sandhagen, Merab's coming off an injury, Henry Cejudo's coming off an injury. It's going to be very interesting to see how this division plays out after UFC 292. So if you look at the tail of the tape for this fight, you have Aljamain Sterling is 23-3, Sean O'Malley is 16-1. Sterling's the champion. O'Malley is ranked number 1 in the UFC official rankings. Sterling is 34, O'Malley is 28. Sterling is 5'7", O'Malley is 5'11". Sterling has a 71-inch reach, and O'Malley has a 72-inch reach. So a 1-inch reach advantage for O'Malley and a 4-inch height advantage for O'Malley, and also a 6-year youth advantage for Sean O'Malley. Now, if you look at Sean O'Malley's overall UFC resume, it's really not all that impressive. And I think it's one of the most unique title challengers in UFC history, because his last fight, he defeated Petr Yan, who's a former champion who I believe at the time was ranked number 1. This was October of 2022 at UFC 280. And this was one of the worst robberies, in my opinion, in UFC history. I thought Petr Yan clearly won this fight. I thought he clearly won it 30-27 when I went back and rewatched it. I know a lot of people disagree with me on that one, but even bare minimum, I believe it's a 29-28 decision win for Petr Yan. But this was a massive step up in competition for Sean O'Malley over the course of his UFC career. And even though I believe he lost, he gets the split decision, which earns him a title shot on paper. And also, he proved that he belonged with the top of the bantamweight division. He went out there and had a competitive fight with a former champion in Petr Yan. And I still do believe he proved a lot in this fight against Petr Yan. Now, the fight before that, he fought Pedro Munoz. It ended in a no contest. This was back in July of last year, UFC 276. Fight was uneventful. I thought Munoz just barely edged out the first round. Second round, it felt like the momentum was starting to shift towards O'Malley. There's an eye poke. Munoz can't continue. The fight gets called a no contest. Then you go through the rest of his resume. Raulian Paiva, Chris Montinho, Thomas Almeida. He TKOs all of them. But what does that really mean? And you look at his overall UFC resume, the only fighter that he has a win over who's currently on the UFC roster is Petr Yan. So that's insanity because he's fighting for a title. Only one fighter on his resume is currently on the UFC roster, and that's one of the most controversial decisions in UFC history, in my opinion. The other fighter that he's fought that's still on the UFC roster was back at UFC 252 in August of 2020 against Marlon Vera. Marlon Vera just brutally chopped his leg, shucked him to the ground, brutally flash KO'd him with ground and pound elbows, and then Sean O'Malley was stretchered out of the cage with no serious injuries. So he's fought really two quality opponents, Petr Yan and Marlon Vera, and arguably lost both of them. I know, fair enough, he got the scorecards against Petr Yan, but it's just such an interesting resume because he's been in the UFC for a while. He's been in the UFC since 2017, December of 2017, and he just hasn't fought very good competition. And he entered the UFC very young. The UFC kind of babied him up the ranks, gave him Pedro Munoz as kind of, dipping his toes into the water to the top 15. That fight really didn't pan out. And then they threw him to the wolves against Petr Yan, which I thought was a highly interesting matchup. And it ended up being a very fun matchup. But ultimately, I thought Sean O'Malley lost that fight. He wins. The judges give him the scorecards. Therefore, I do believe that Sean O'Malley has earned a title shot because I don't agree with necessarily fans taking decisions and saying, well, I believe he lost, so it doesn't mean anything now. At the end of the day, he got the win, whether I disagree with it or not. A win over Petr Yan, the fact that it was even that competitive, that crazy judges could score it for him, I think proves something in itself. And it's a very interesting fight to look back on and say, okay, did this prove how good Sean O'Malley is? Or was this kind of, one of those fights where he kind of got lucky here with the judges' scorecards and, people kind of played revisionist history with the scorecards? Because I believe after that fight, a lot of people didn't necessarily think Sean O'Malley won that fight. And then after he got the decision, I feel like a lot of people played revisionist history and said, oh, well, I think he got 1-3. I don't believe that he got 1-3, but that's a topic for a whole nother video that I've already talked about in the past. But O'Malley's resume is one of the weakest UFC resumes for a title contender I've seen in the past few years. Another thing I meant to mention, 16 wins, 11 by knockout, 1 by submission, 4 by decision. Of his 1 loss, he got TKO'd by Marlon Chito Vera. Moving over to the champion, Aljamain Sterling. He has 26 pro MMA fights, 23 wins, 3 by knockout, 8 by submission, 11 by decision, and 1 by disqualification. 3 losses, 1 by knockout, 2 by decision. So he comes in this fight on a very long winning streak. Hasn't lost since 2017, December of 2017 against Marlon Moraes, where he got clipped with a nasty knee. It was almost a head kick, almost basically got just flatline KO'd by a knee that came off a head kick. But his title run has kind of been muddied in controversy, and he's one of the most disrespected UFC champions really of all time. His last fight was against Henry Cejudo at UFC 288. I scored this fight for him 3-2. It was a razor close fight against Henry Cejudo. Some people scored it for Henry Cejudo, so he kind of gets a controversial decision there. The fight before that, he beats the crap out of TJ Dillashaw, dominates him, finishes him, but TJ Dillashaw came in with a shoulder injury, so a lot of people kind of say, oh, well, TJ was up there in age and he came in with an injury. The fight before that, he gets a split decision against Petr Yan. First round, razor close. Second and third round, clearly Aljamain Sterling dominated with the grappling, got his back, controlled him. Then the fourth and fifth round, Petr Yan won. So it really came down to that first round, which was very highly competitive and uneventful. So essentially, you have this controversial decision. It goes Aljamain Sterling's way. So pretty much every title defense now has been muddied in controversy. The fight before that was the original title shot that he got against Petr Yan. Starts really competitive, high volume, high pressure. starts to kind of go Petr Yan's way. It's looking like Petr Yan is going to TKO him in the later rounds. Yan throws an illegal knee, gets disqualified, and Aljamain Sterling wins the belt on a disqualification because Mark Smith just whispers as loud as possible to the doctor, if he can't continue, it's going to be a disqualification. So a lot of people, the disrespect for Aljamain Sterling kind of stems back to that. And I've even been in that camp too. I don't like the way he won the belt at all. But at the end of the day, we have to give him respect for some of these performances that he's put on. To go back out there roughly a year later and then beat Petr Yan in a highly competitive fight, I think is super impressive. To go out there and get the win over TJ Dillashaw, even though he was injured, I still think is impressive. And to get the win over former champion Henry Cejudo, I still think is impressive. So this is a very compelling matchup. And I just think it's so weird how you have a guy in Aljamain Sterling who literally gets no respect but has all these quality names on his resume. And then you have Sean O'Malley, who has like this cult behind him, who hypes him up and acts like he's one of the greatest, when really he has one good win, and that one good win is muddied in controversy. Now, when I look at this matchup, it's a typical grappler versus striker matchup. Can Aljamain Sterling get it to the ground? Can Sean O'Malley keep it standing? Because there is no doubt that Aljamain Sterling is the far superior grappler than Sean O'Malley. But there is also no doubt that Sean O'Malley is the far superior striker to Aljamain Sterling. It's how does those skill sets match up in this fight? Because even though I believe that Aljamain Sterling is just head and shoulders better than Sean O'Malley in the grappling in BJJ, I think that same skill gap is legitimately there for Sean O'Malley striking. As good as Aljamain Sterling striking, or as good as his grappling is above O'Malley's striking is that good above Aljamain Sterling striking. So that's what makes this fight so compelling, because you have O'Malley, who's such a dynamic striker, who has KO power, but he's still relatively unproven because of the level of competition that he's faced. And what I think this fight really comes down to is path to victory. I think Aljamain Sterling can win via decision. I think he can win via submission. And I think he can win via TKO. For Sean O'Malley, I truly believe he has to finish this fight with a flashy technique. He has to catch Aljamain Sterling coming in, land a knee, and KO him. He has to catch him with a right hand and sleep him. He has to catch him with a wheel kick and sleep him. For Sean O'Malley, I can't see him winning a submission, getting a submission. I can't see him winning a decision either. So I just think Aljamain Sterling has so many paths to victory, and I just think the grappling deficit between these two guys is massive. And I do see the UFC kind of putting their finger on the scales, because Sean O'Malley fought in October of 2022. He knew he was fighting for a title after that fight. Meanwhile, Sterling fought in May of this year, and they're making him have a very quick turnaround, a 3.5-month turnaround to fight Sean O'Malley. And O'Malley's basically had 10 months to prepare for Sterling, where Sterling's basically making back-to-back weight cuts, and he has to turn around on essentially 3.5 months. I made an entire video about that. I will link that down in the description. It's also in my UFC 292 playlist. But I think you have to take that into account as well, because Aljamain Sterling is a very big bantamweight. That's why he's eventually going to featherweight. So I wonder if those weight cuts are going to affect him. But ultimately, I think the grappling of Aljamain Sterling is going to be too much. I'm going Aljamain Sterling late first round rear naked choke. I just think Sean O'Malley, even with the 10 months, the way I saw him out grappled by Petr Yan just locking the hands, dumping him down, easy double leg up against the fence. And even though Sean O'Malley had very good scrambles to get back to his feet, every time he used the fence to get back to his feet, he was giving up his back. And in a lot of the scrambles against Petr Yan, he was giving up his back as well. And if you do that against Aljamain Sterling, with his striking, looks to basically cause chaos. He just moves forward, pressures forward, has this funky style where he kind of strikes and throws these weird movements. And all he's looking to create is back exposure. The second you turn, or you look to get up against the fence and you turn a little bit and give up your back, Aljamain Sterling is jumping on your back. He's sinking in the hooks. He's sinking in a body triangle. And then he's looking for a rear naked choke. He's looking to get a full mount and TKO via ground and pound. He's looking to just use that position to dominate you on the ground. And I really, truly believe, even though Sean O'Malley's had 10 months to prepare, I don't think that's enough. Aljamain Sterling's been training with Merab Dvalishvili for literally years. Aljamain Sterling has had this elite level jiu-jitsu for years. And I think, can Sean O'Malley catch him on the way in? Because Aljo does have some ugly entries. He does keep his hands kind of low. And Sean O'Malley's super accurate and super powerful in the feet. I just think once Aljo gets a hold of him, I think he'll be able to drag him down with ease. And I think even if O'Malley, let's say, scrambles to the fence and starts to get up, I think O'Malley's going to give up his back up against the fence. I don't think 10 months of training for Aljamain Sterling's style is enough to overcome the years of experience that Aljamain Sterling has implementing that style. And I think Petr Yan prioritized damage on the ground over control. Aljamain Sterling will prioritize the position. He will prioritize the control before he even attempts to get a submission, before he even attempts to beat him up. And I think what's going to happen in this fight, for a minute or two, you'll see Sterling kind of be a little bit wonky. You'll see him kind of chopping at the legs. But in a minute or so, he's just going to sloppily close the distance. He could get caught with a shot, but he's going to close the distance. He's going to get a hold of Sean O'Malley. He's going to get the body lock. He's going to drag him down. Maybe Sean O'Malley works back up, but gives up his back. And I think Aljamain Sterling, he's so good once he gets that back mount. There's no getting out of it. We saw it against Petr Yan. And I think once he gets that back position, I think because of the training over the last few months and so for Sean O'Malley, I think he'll be able to defend early. But I think Aljo just be mixing up the ground and pound. And I think he's so good at finding that neck and finding that rear naked choke. I see him, with 4 minutes on the ground or 3.5 minutes on the ground to work after he gets the back. I think Sterling finds that submission towards the end of the round. I think O'Malley will be defending decently until he's not. I think Sterling will just be beating him up. There'll be positions where maybe he gets the back. I think he'll have the body triangle. I think he'll be squeezing Sean O'Malley really hard with the body triangle. I think he'll be peppering him with shots. Boom, Sean O'Malley leaves his chin up in the air just for a split second. Boom, Aljamain Sterling wraps up a rear naked choke, finishes him in the late first round. I could also see maybe Sean O'Malley's able to defend. Maybe a takedown doesn't happen till maybe the first half or halfway through the first round. And maybe Sean O'Malley's just saved by the bell after the first round. But I still see Aljamain Sterling closing the distance again in the second round, getting a takedown, and I think he would get the submission in the second round, or maybe even a TKO in the second round via ground and pound. But I really do believe that Aljamain Sterling finishes it in the first or second round, but I'm going Aljamain Sterling late first round rear naked choke. I think he gets it done against Sean O'Malley. Sean O'Malley striking, a lot of it's predicated on these flashy techniques and a lot of kicks. If he throws a lot of kicks against Aljamain Sterling, he's going to catch him and take him down off of those kicks. If Sean O'Malley starts using those spinning techniques, Aljamain Sterling is going to use it to close the distance, grab a body lock, and he might already be on the back because O'Malley throws a spinning technique. Aljamain Sterling times it. Next thing you know, boom, body lock on the back up against the fence. And I just think Aljamain Sterling is just too skilled. The skill deficit in the grappling is going to be too much for Sean O'Malley to overcome. And he's going to be worried about letting his hands go on the feet, because he's going to be worried about the grappling. And I see Aljamain Sterling having some success on the feet as well, but I don't think he's going to hang out on the feet too much. Aljamain Sterling has a very high fight IQ. He's not going to risk getting KO'd. He's going to close the distance. He's going to look to grapple early and often. He's going to drag him to the ground early, and he's going to find the rear naked choke in the first round. I have to go Aljamain Sterling in this fight. I think he gets it done in the first round, but bare minimum, I think he gets a finish in the first 2 rounds of this fight. I think Sean O'Malley has to knock him out if he wants to win this matchup. But let me know what you guys think down in the comments. Don't forget to like the video. Don't forget to subscribe. And thank you so much for watching.